Nashville was hot and steamy in the morning, and I was on my way to the Great Smoky Mountains. As I approached Pigeon Forge, Tennessee and Dollywood, I could see the sky in the distance getting ready to dump a ton of thunder and rain all over. There was an entrance to the Great Smoky Mountains National Park that bypassed Gatlinburg. That was the one for me. The sun was out and I was on the road in the forest. After a bit, I pulled into a picnic area by a stream in a very wooded area. It was beautiful. I hung out and ate some snacks I had, and then proceeded to replenish all the water lost through sweating and riding in the heat of the day. Exiting the park through Cherokee, I took a southerly route for about 20 minutes to Bryson City. I was happy to be in my home time zone and in North Carolina. I thought it would be interesting to find a place in Bryson City. Riding around a bit, I found a cool boutique hotel and bistro. I anticipated an authentic stay and a meal with interesting people. The double overnight was in order. The place was magical. There were positive sayings in various places. On the window in big letters were the words Hotel Bistro, and at the bottom, Gratitude. The entrance to my room had a sign as tall as me that said, "Live every moment, laugh every day, love beyond words." The menu had at the bottom, "Eat with integrity, live with gratitude. Cheers, y'all." It was an oasis I'd call home for a couple of nights. Taking a brief walk around town after dinner in Bryson, which is basically a couple of blocks, was peaceful. A quiet evening, pretty views of the Smoky Mountains and the river. I sat outside for a while feeling beatific. My overused but very accurate expression of how I was feeling. Blissful, thankful, content, happy, and grateful. Rest day in Bryson City. It was a much needed day to not be on the bike and to re-energize. I had a nice breakfast, way too much coffee, and got to work behind the computer. I was getting a ton of stuff done and eventually forced myself to go for a walk around Bryson City for lunch and some ice cream. It's a quaint town and a great staging area for tons of activities, not just motorcycling. I was looking forward to getting on the Blue Ridge Parkway tomorrow and heading north for a couple of days. It was going to be a sweet mountain finale for this trip. I would then be heading to Durham to hang out with my daughter Margot for a few days, before throttling south and home on the 50th day. I was anticipating heading north on the Blue Ridge Parkway and feeling charged up to ride the flowing and twisting North Carolina roads. The temperature started to drop ever so slightly as I made my way from Bryson City to the entrance of the Parkway in Cherokee. The air was wet and heavy, but it wasn't raining. As I climbed in elevation, I was moving through layers of fog. The updraft was pulling the fog higher and higher. The forming clouds were moving across the road. Eventually, there were pockets of sunshine. There was no predicting weather and visibility as you ride a ribbon of road through the mountains. There was something a bit more special about riding the Parkway. I had been this way before. Sometimes the road was crowded and other times it was wide open for me to play. The weather always varied. The riding conditions this time were not necessarily different from previous trips. However, it was more special. I think it was a combination of coming home, being back to somewhere on the motorcycle that was familiar, as well as the fact that this was the final act of the trip. These next few days would be the last mountain riding for the 50 days at 50 years old journey. I was feeling a greater sense of accomplishment with respect to being on the Blue Ridge Parkway. In the past, I rode from Florida, which was a bit of a haul for me, typically 750 miles or so depending on the route. This time, I had traveled over 10,300 miles to get here. It felt a bit like a celebration of my journey, getting to ride the mountains of North Carolina. The familiar was comforting, and those roads and the mountain landscape were energizing. It was good to be there riding. I decided to stop for lunch at a familiar spot, Pisgah Inn, right on the Parkway about an hour or so south of Asheville. The scenery in the spot were more interesting than the lunch, but that was good also. Heading to the bike after lunch, a light rain started and some big black clouds rolled in. I broke through the back end of the storm into the sun. Arriving in Asheville, I found the not so obscenely priced room on the outskirts. I took an Uber downtown. Trying a new restaurant and then a walkabout for some dessert left me feeling content and happy to be in Asheville for the night. One night would be enough though. I would be leaving the mountains in a couple of days to head east to Durham, so I really wanted to play in the corners tomorrow while I had the opportunity. Before I knew it, a couple of hours passed between waking up and pulling out of the hotel parking lot. Climbing in elevation and dropping temperature, and then the sun began to break through, burning off the fog and drying things out. The riding was the kind that makes you smile in your helmet. Throttle control, leaning into the corners, accelerating at just the right time, and having an overall playful ride, all made for another great day riding in the mountains. I arrived in Blowing Rock for lunch, a cool mountain town. It's a quaint little village with lots of interesting inns scattered within and around the town. During lunch, I thought I would just stay and call it a day. But before I could even finish lunch, I was itching to be on the bike again. An interesting serendipitous encounter happened before I could ride more than a block. In the opposite direction, another BMW R1200 GS was coming, and we gave one another the customary wave, but I recognized the bike setup. I had seen his Instagram feed over the last few days, and he was back from South America and just happened to be posting pictures around Asheville. I've been following this guy. He had been traveling the world for 16 months or so. I turned around and noticed he stopped. I pulled up beside him and called out his name. It was a good conversation about travel, adventure, and sharing our respective plans or lack thereof. We said our goodbyes and both rode off in opposite directions. I didn't snap any pictures, just wanted to be in the moment. I remind myself that it's okay not to have a picture of everything that happens on this trip. A chance encounter? Maybe. In a way, the universe was responding to the energy I was radiating. At least, that was what I'd like to believe. Maybe the universe was reinforcing what I was doing. Sort of a pat on the back as if to say, you're doing the right thing, you're on the right track, keep it up. I took a ride to Banner Elk and found some forest roads to play on for a bit. Today was the last mountain riding day of the trip, so I decided to have some fun. After passing Grandfather Mountain and Banner Elk, I returned to Blowing Rock for the night. I found this interesting inn and the parking lot was full of vintage Chevys. It was a car club holding their monthly meeting and group trip. It was an easy decision for me. The place was authentic, the cars were cool, and the price was right, so I grabbed a room. After some minor bike maintenance, I took a shower and then walked into town. It was nice to stretch my legs. Grabbing a beer at one place and then dinner and live music at another made for a super conclusion to a spectacular day. Blowing Rock had a nice vibe. It's truly a small village and wasn't crowded. There were plenty of choices to eat and drink, and it makes for a good base camp if you're planning day excursions or just passing through. Coming back to the room, I stayed outside my door. There were chairs set up by each room. I had the chance to speak with a couple from the Chevy Car Club. This trip continued to reinforce the fact that travel is about the people you meet on the road. Tomorrow I would head east and pull away from the mountains. It was with mixed feelings because I saw the end of this trip approaching, but I was excited to see my daughter Margot tomorrow. At the time, she was 3 hours away in Durham, so I'd be having lunch and dinner with her. Even though the trip was coming to a conclusion in a few days, there was still a bunch of adventure to be had. I was thankful for what had been and what was to come. It's a great ride, this thing called life. Setting up the bike, I was excited to get going and make my way to Durham to have lunch with Margot and spend a few nights there. The route I was taking had me on the Blue Ridge Parkway for about 11 miles, and then more or less a straight line east for about 160 miles. The sun was shining and I was in the mountains. I was enjoying the ride, the good weather, and the last of the mountain air and views for this journey. Leaving the Blue Ridge Parkway, the temperature began to rise and I was heading east. Still very excited about seeing Margot, but I was reflecting on the trip, drawing ever so close to the finish. This entire experience had exceeded my expectations, but on a journey like this, that's an easy feat. When you don't have a firm plan, when you're living in the moment, part of what you have to do is let go of expectations. Letting go of expectations allows you to accept what comes and not fight against what is. Letting go of expectations can work both ways. Having high, achievable expectations allows you to stretch and achieve great goals. The key word is achievable. However, expectations can also limit your imagination and the possibilities. On this trip, I did have certain expectations, but I was cognizant about not making that the focal point. To make room for serendipity and those no coincidence moments, it's important not to hold too tight to your expectations. On my way to Durham, I played back some of the movie reel of my experiences during this trip, and it became very clear that it truly was a rich journey that I took with the best version of myself. I felt very joyful and twisted the throttle, excited to see Margot. Arriving in Durham, I waited in the hotel parking lot for Margot. She was on her way and just got out of class. Margot pulled in, parked, and big hugs and kisses followed. It was a much-needed reunion. We hadn't seen one another in about 9 weeks, and so much had happened for both of us. I traveled 10,700 miles to see her. Quite a significant number, but more importantly, what had occurred over all those miles. We lived about 750 miles from Durham in Florida. The journey took me far and back, full of stories, experiences, emotions, and joyfulness to share with her. We spent the afternoon in her apartment having lunch, a couple of beers, sharing tales of the time apart, followed by an awesome dinner of tapas at Mateo's, sharing a great bottle of Tempranillo from Spain. It marked an important milestone for my 50-50 journey, getting back to my daughter. No matter how far you travel, being in the orbit of the ones you love is so important. While time and time zone don't diminish the love, and today there are so many ways to stay connected with technology, there was nothing like a hug and looking into her eyes. Talk about travel past and future, my experiences on the road, and Margot's dreams for some adventures after graduation, all made for a day full of smiles. Hanging out in Durham for the night was a good candidate for pizza and wine. I knew as always it would be hard saying goodbye, but tomorrow I'd be heading further south. I was so grateful and felt a ton of gratitude for the last 2 days and 2 nights in Durham with her. It was such an important part of this journey. It did get me thinking about straight line travel on the motorcycle and how maybe it's a metaphor for how we live our lives sometimes. Traveling in a straight line on the motorcycle for too long, typically highway miles, can become monotonous. As you buzz along the highway, you fall into an autopilot mode. It's cruise control, figuratively and literally. Your mind can go other places and you're not always 100% in the moment. It can be boring and routine. You're checking off the miles to wherever you're going or the next gas stop. All you're doing is counting the miles. You're occupying yourself with thoughts of the past or of the future. I'm not saying you can't be in the moment, but straight line travel relies a lot more on muscle memory and a lot less on being mindful and in the moment. Routine activities in daily life, straight line travel, motorcycling down the road, or having a set exercise regimen are not bad things. They're actually necessary. The point is simple. Straight line travel, doing the same thing for too long without deviation, is not only boring, but not healthy physically, emotionally, or spiritually. That's why people take vacations. That's why schools are out for summer. That's why new experiences are so energizing. In large part, this journey was about breaking the straight line travel during this period of my life. It's not necessary to do epic things. Maybe sometimes it's enough to try a new restaurant, take a different route on your next walk or drive, or simply find something new to try. Newness and breaking that straight line travel dilemma in whatever you're up to takes you back into the moment and being mindful of what you're doing. It's important to seek opportunities to break those self-imposed constraints and change your routines up. That's what makes life interesting.